Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everybody. This is Lisa with Love, Life, and Law of Attraction, and I am here with Cassie Parks. How are you today?
I'm fabulous. How about you?
I am good. I was just telling you when the show was starting to go, so I don't know if the Potsticker, the pug that we're going to talk about today, has decided that this is his home and he's going to protect it no matter what, and he barks a lot. So it's a little bit less embarrassing to have the constant dog barking in the background, considering we're going to tell his story, but just bear in mind, I've got doggies on hyper protect my home mode today.
Cool. I'm excited to talk about Potsticker. That's exciting. Should we just jump right into the Potsticker story?
The Potsticker story, and I said to somebody the other day, I could schedule 4 calls an hour long in the next week to talk about Potsticker, but should we start with my story or Potsticker's story first? Want to start with mine?
Let's start with your story. Yeah.
Okay. Do you know what a group of pugs is called?
I don't, but I know you do.
The technical name for a group of pugs is called a grumble. And I love that because if you've been around pugs very much, it's pretty appropriate. And I used to have 3 pugs. And now, up until a week ago, I had 3 dogs, but only one of which is a pug. And I've always believed that pugs really belong in grumbles. They recognize each other. They're kind of like Pringles. You can't have just one pug. But I've only had 1 pug for going on 3 years. For the last couple of years, I've been pretty insistent that I was ready for another pug. And my husband has been pretty insistent that our dog census is full. We've got enough, that 3 dogs was enough for him.
I've seen the look.
Uh-huh.
I've seen the, Lisa says census is low, and I've seen the David, I don't think so. Look.
Right. And it's fair because David takes care of the dogs. He does the hard doggy work. And, see, there they go. I totally get that. I get the easy part of the dog-loving job, the cuddling job, the being home to play with the dog job, and he feeds the dogs, which in our house is a major operation. And he takes the dogs to the vet, and he cleans up the yard after the dogs. So I understand where he's coming from, but I have had a hot and passionate desire that it was time that I get another pug. And really I kind of let it sit. I mean, I really kind of wanted to respect where he was at. But about a year ago, it was almost a year ago exactly because it was right before our anniversary, David found a little tiny girl, black pug, and it looked like she was desperately in need of rehoming. She had literally been found at a rest area. It looked like somebody had lost her or maybe dumped her off, which is hard to imagine. And he had met these people, and they were looking for the perfect pug home, which, come on, I am the perfect pug home. And
true.
So he was totally positive that for our anniversary last year, he was going to give me this little pug puppy. And I would see him, taking the computer in the back room and typing little secret messages, which is not like David, and I knew that something was up. And finally, several days later, he sat down and he said, okay, this is what was going on. I found this little pug. This was her name. Here's a picture. To rub it in, I don't think he meant to do that. And it didn't work. But I also knew he had kind of tried. When that fell through, he had contacted one of my friends that works for a humane society and asked her to keep an eye out for a pug, and it didn't happen. And so at the beginning of this year, I got on this Seattle Pug Rescue site, and I filled out the application and paid my money, and there were 6 pugs ready to go, available to adopt. And I was pretty positive that by my birthday, which is in January, I would have a fresh pug in my hands. But I couldn't get these people on the phone. They have to come and do a home inspection before they will actually process your application. And the one time they scheduled to do the inspection, we were going to be out of town. And I tried to call them, and I got them on the phone one time after that. And it's like she didn't want to drive when it was dark, and it was the middle of winter, so it's dark all the time. I mean, all of these pugs available, and I couldn't find a way to get through the application process. And I kind of, again, just thought, okay, I really, really want this. I don't know why it's happening. I feel frustrated. I want my pug. And so 3 weeks ago or so, we went on a very long family road trip. And I decided that I was going to leverage law of attraction. I had a lot of time on my hands on that trip. And I was going to leverage law of attraction, and we were going to find my pug on that trip. Like, no doubt about it. And I totally believed that I would pull up at a rest stop and we would just find this pug. Somebody would be there, or that we would see pugs at a hotel, or there would be pugs at a campground. And every time we stopped the car, every rest stop, gas station, lunch break, I looked for my pug and came home without one. And so the day after we got home from our trip, and I kid you not, this totally for real happened. The day after we got home from our trip, I got our Roomba had broken. You know what a Roomba is, right?
The robot vacuum, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
like
no.
When you have a house full of dogs, you need a robot vacuum. And our Roomba was broken. So I hopped on Craigslist really quick, and I thought, I'm just going to search Roomba and see if anybody's got one. So I typed Roomba into the search bar on Craigslist, and the search that came back was a Craigslist listing that no Roombas, just pugs.
No Roombas, just pugs.
Or just pugs. Just pugs singular. And I, checked myself. For a split second, I thought, how did that happen? And then I thought, doesn't matter. So I read the listing, and it was pretty brief, and I said to David, I'm going to respond. And I think he thought, we looked at the ad, it had been placed way earlier in the day. He thought he was totally safe. That pug was probably gone, taken, spoken for. And so I texted the guy at 11 o'clock at night and said, hey, is the pug still with you? If so, I'm interested. I'd like to talk. Let me know. And the next morning when I woke up, I had a very long text message from him saying a lot of things, but basically, yes, the pug was still there. And so he explained to me in the text message that he was in, I don't know, some town in eastern Washington that I had never heard of, and had said that he would agree to meet in Wenatchee, which is a long ways away from me. It's, 4 hours away, which doesn't sound that far if you're going to get the thing you've been waiting for 2 years, but our state is currently on fire. And Wenatchee is right smack in the middle of the fire zone. And so I jokingly said to David, if I can get that dog out of eastern Washington, will you agree that I can take him? And again, I think he thought he was safe. That's kind of unlikely. He agreed. So when I talked to Scott on the phone, I asked, I basically said, I'm in Olympia. And I didn't even have to ask. He said, no problem, I'll meet you in Seattle. So it was on at that point. On the day that we were we were meeting to get him, the fires had escalated. The day before that, the fires had basically rolled over a couple of towns. Many of the roads were closed down. I talked to him on Saturday morning just to see if he was even going to try, and he was already en route. He had been on the road for an hour, and at that point he had already been detoured 2 times. And he said to me, I've lived here all my life. I can find a back road out. I know I can. So I got on the road and went to North Seattle, where we were supposed to meet. Through everything, he was only 10 minutes late. And when we saw them coming across the parking lot, little dog in tow, Potsticker is, I would say, severely handicapped. severely handicapped. And my very first thought was, that's the cutest pug I've ever seen. I mean, both of my pugs are sitting with me. I'm going to rephrase. One of the cutest pugs I've ever seen. And my second thought was, I don't know if we can handle that. And for a little second, he was a little hesitant to meet us, but I walked over to my passenger door, really to let my kid out. And the minute I opened the passenger door, this little dog who could barely walk jumped in the front seat. So we brought him home. And I obviously just wrote a blog post about this. I mean, the thing about David is he's an occupational therapist. I mean, one of his specialties is modification. Like, he can modify anything to make somebody work or something work for somebody who has a disability. And he's genius with it. Like, David looked at Potsticker, and he didn't see all of the handicap. He didn't see this pug who was very severely crippled. I mean, he just saw a list of household projects. He looked at him and he started doing a mental inventory of what Potsticker needed. I mean, he's fit in, it's been 5 days now, he's fit in perfectly. And it worked exactly the way it was supposed to work. What I didn't know, I mean, in all of this time, and I mean, sometimes it's been pretty easy. Sometimes I've been pretty frustrated and desperate about why my pug wasn't showing up. What I didn't know, what was happening on the back end of this creation. So should we talk about all this?
Yeah, definitely.
Full of time. And he had his original owner, who loved and adored him greatly, had died. And he got shuffled to another family member who was also quite elderly and had some trouble, I think, probably really taking care of him well. And during that time, Potsticker got what they called pug depressed, which I've seen it. It's not pretty. And he experienced this injury that caused his disability. And then that person that was caring for him passed away. And so he ended up with Scott, yet another family member. And Scott loved this dog desperately, but he was gone for work a lot. And, I mean, it was really, really clear that kind of this place where Scott lived with all of these wide open spaces out in the country, Potsticker wasn't the dog that could really appreciate that because he can't go out and run and play. And he was home a lot, alone on the couch, and he really wanted to be with people. And at some point, it became pretty clear to Scott that he was going to have to move, that the house he was living in was going to be put up for sale. And he just didn't know how he was going to be able to pull this off to rent someplace with this dog. And so he tried desperately to find somebody else in his family to take him. And he spent several weeks on this, like calling everybody, saying, look, it was Mom's dog. Somebody needs to step up. Like, I can't do this anymore, but we all love him. Can somebody take him? And none of them agreed. And when the fires started in eastern Washington, I mean, I'm a long ways away. I'm hundreds of miles away. Our air quality here is bad. But they were right in the middle of the fire zone. And Potsticker started getting, like, respiratory issues really, really badly. When I talked to him on the phone, when they were on their way, I could hear Potsticker in the car wheezing and gasping for air. Like, pugs don't have very big noses. They can't handle a lot of that kind of stuff. And Scott was beginning to feel, there they go. Scott was beginning to feel very desperate. Like, he had to get this handled. And so he literally did sit down with Potsticker one day and say, look, I have a plan, buddy. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to put an ad on Craigslist. We're going to agree that the very first person who responds to that ad is going to be the right person. And I'm not going to scare people away by talking about what, some of your special needs, but I'm just going to set a strong, he used the word intention, and I I seriously doubt this guy's seen The Secret. I mean, it's like we're going to set a strong intention that the first person who responds is the right person, and the right person is going to see past all of this other stuff. And I know it's going to work. And when he placed that ad, he placed it free pug. He figured he would be peppered with, you know, lots and lots of responses for, he just figured it would flood, and it didn't. He posted the ad, and nobody responded to that ad for 6 full hours until I sat down and typed in Roomba. And what was really clear to me in hindsight, for a lot of different reasons. I mean, clearly this is the household Potsticker is supposed to be in. Probably not because of me. Probably because of David. I mean, David's the right guy, Potsticker job. But this has been, I mean, if we looked at this story in reverse and we just looked at Potsticker and Scott and what they were going through and what was happening over the course of, you know, a couple of years or a few months and then definitely these last few weeks, we would look at Potsticker and Scott and say, master manifestors.
Right.
Like,
right.
They nailed it. It was perfect. But then when you look at it from my side of the story, like, it's pretty easy to look at it and say she typed in Roomba, she got free pug. I mean, forget the fact that it took 2 years. Like, they got out with the fires. They, you know, it worked perfectly. Like, you would look at me and you would say, master manifestor. That was awesome. She nailed it. And what I think that illustrates is when we are wanting something, when we are working on manifesting something, when we have a desire that we've launched that we don't see the physical evidence of, we think it's not happening. Like, we're looking for that final manifestation. And sometimes we discount all of the little pieces, kind of the cogs in the wheel on the back end, that are maybe required to bring our manifestation into physical reality. And those are the kinds of things that we wouldn't probably see. And so when we're not seeing the evidence or seeing the actual manifestation, we might think that it's not working. But the minute you launch that desire, that thing that you're seeking is actually seeking you. And just because you can't see the back end doesn't mean that it's not happening. In this case, I have kind of an intimate bird's eye view into the back end of that story. Very often we don't. And we still kind of discount everything it took to get there, like every little piece of the process. All of those pieces are little bitty mini manifestations in and of themselves. But when we don't see it, we discount it and we think it's not working. Like, this story perfectly illustrated for me, like I said, that what I've been seeking all along was also seeking me at the same time. I just didn't know it.
Right. And, I mean, other than trusting, like, how could you know it? Because in this case, there wasn't, I don't know, actually, before I say that, I'm going to ask you, like, have you looked back? Can you see that there was evidence he was coming? Or was it just...
No.
Right.
No. I mean, when I set out on that vacation and said I'm going to find my pug, I had a strong sense of certainty. Like, I was sort of in kind of I was kind of sassy. Like, I'm going to show them. We're going to roll up on the pug, and I'm going to show them. Well, you know, and when it didn't happen, like, I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't angry. I was just like, okay, you know, no pug. I was, you know, to the degree, so I'm going to backstep a little bit. To the degree that I got to a point for a period of time where I felt some really sassy certainty, I think that was evident.
Right.
Like, the feeling sense of that certainty that I got on that trip, in hindsight, might have been the only evidence that I had.
Mhm. Right. So I have another question, because I think this type of manifestation, especially this, like, thing that's seeking you, is often dogs I would guess as a relationship coach, you see this a lot with relationships. I know as you're telling the story to me, it sounds a lot like David. Like there's elements that feel like the story of you and David, and knowing both sides, what was going on behind the scenes. In some ways it was a lot like David. It was like, these things were happening. These things had to come into place, and so I think it's like the stuff, like if you're manifesting stuff, it's a little bit easier sometimes to see the evidence, to know it's coming. And the stuff go ahead.
Well, I mean, you're right about David. Like I've said all along, if somebody had told me that my soulmate, the man of my dreams, was just working on getting his divorce, I could have relaxed. Like I would have been a lot less dangerous in the world. Just chill out. He's settling this thing with his divorce. It's going to be okay. And I mean, even thinking about this, like outside of that kind of relationship before the call, I was thinking about a business thing with my first celebrity client. Have I ever told you how I actually got my first celebrity client?
I've heard parts. I don't know if I've heard this part.
I had loosely set an intention, like most coaches do. Wouldn't it be fun to work with a celebrity? And I think I had even done some scripting around that. Like, that would be fun, and scripted it out. And it was a lot looser than my desperate driving need to get a new pup, that's for sure. Probably because I didn't think it could happen.
Right.
So I got asked one day to do a live real radio, like broadcasting on a radio station in LA interview. It happened to be a day that I had something else I wanted to do, and I seriously considered canceling it. Like when I got the date and I realized there was a scheduling conflict, I thought about not doing it. And when we went earlier in the day, even still, I was kind of thinking I may just email her and tell her I'm not going to make it. And we had some car problems that day. So, I mean, it seemed pretty easy. I know that sounds irresponsible on the day of the interview to still be thinking about canceling, but I was. And when I figured out that my car wasn't running right, I was like, oh, screw it. I'll do that interview. And to be clear, I didn't feel like it was the best interview I've ever done. And I've never been asked back to that show. So it probably wasn't the best interview I've ever done. On the back end of that, there is a woman who I now know who is a personal assistant for a celebrity. And she was on set. It was a weekend. She was irritated that she was having to work on a weekend. She was on set with somebody, and somebody in the set scenario, not her actual boss, but somebody else, needed something. And so her boss looked at her and said, will you just go do that? And she's like, no, I don't even have my car. He's like, my driver will take you. So she gets in the car with this driver, and she's irritated, and talk radio is on the radio. I mean, there's a talk radio station blaring. And she's like, will you change that? And he's like, I can't. It's driving me crazy, but the radio's broken. I listen to this crap all day long. So she sat in the back of the car listening to talk radio, and, strangely, what she heard was that interview. And 4 weeks later, her boss's life required some help. He needed some professional support. And it just so happened that because she was stuck in that car with a radio that didn't work, she remembered my website name. That's how I got my first celebrity client. It was clearly seeking me while I was seeking it, but I had no clue. I wouldn't have even had any idea how to fantasize those details together.
Which is super cool and very, very important information to remember that, people, when you're dealing with people, there's moving parts.
When you're dealing, I think, with anything, there's moving parts because there's almost always people behind the scenes pushing the thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, we're not manifesting cars out of thin air. They happen because people touch them. I mean, there are always moving parts. And I think what I've learned, I mean, really the Potsticker thing illustrates it, but the David thing illustrates it. The story I just told is that when I'm asking myself, why isn't this happening, counting the fact that the moving pieces behind the scenes probably are. Just because I can't, it doesn't mean that it's not happening. It probably is. I mean, let's face it, the most unlikely thing in the world was for Lisa to land that celebrity client. But the pieces were in motion.
Right.
So have you experienced it?
I've experienced it, thinking in terms of this call, I've experienced it in a very, tangible way with money. I was seeking people who would be really excited to take the money course. And a woman let me know pretty soon into the course. She was like, I just want to let you know that I manifested you. I created this. I sat down and I said, why isn't there a course that offers, where you could pay at the end? Because, I can't afford to do it up front, but I need the knowledge to get the money to pay. And so that was a really cool, I don't know the moving pieces story, behind that, but I think it's a good example of just remembering, what you're seeking is seeking you. And I have a story, from college where pieces didn't necessarily fit together like they could have because people didn't ask, and people discounted that what was seeking you is seeking them. And I'll tell that real quick, and then I want to kind of give some steps about, just feeling good while you're waiting. The quick version of that story is that I hem and hawed about whether I was going to play softball in college, and I went back and forth, and it was a time in my life where I didn't necessarily believe I was good enough to play where I wanted to play. And so I didn't seek what was seeking me. And on the other side of this, there's a catcher from California who got a scholarship to the school that I ended up going to, who really wanted to go to this school in California. And she had sort of given up. The offer to Regis, where I went, was on the table, and she accepted it. One day later, the college of her dreams made her an offer, but she'd already accepted the other offer. And college isn't where it's like a job. I can go back on that. I mean, you would have to go through a big process to get released. And so she ended up where she didn't necessarily want to be. And as I was sitting down with the coach, when I finally made contact and decided I was going to play, his words to me were, I wouldn't have recruited her if I knew you were on your way. Or his words to me were, I wouldn't have recruited her. I wouldn't have sought her out if I would have known you were coming. And so I think it's the flip side of this story where it illustrates that it's almost our responsibility to ask for what we want and to seek that, knowing that there's another side seeking us.
Incredibly, I mean, that's a hugely valuable point. That if you short-circuit your own desires, that it's the butterfly effect. I mean, there are consequences to short-circuiting your own desires. I think we have desires for a reason. I mean, generally speaking, our desires might seem random and they might seem selfish, but there is a greater good sort of weaving of reality that when we short-circuit our own desires, it can have other effects on other people. That's a really good point.
And I think we see that play out with Potsticker, with your celebrity client. I know who you are. I know what kind of coach you are, so I can imagine what kind of work you did in that person's life, not seeking out the desire to have a celebrity client or just even playing with that desire would have denied someone else some life-changing information. Not speaking the pug you desire would have denied a home to this precious little pug.
Who needed David?
Right.
Who needed David?
He did need David. That's the part. You can also read the story if you want to read it again on Lisa's blog, at least M. Hayes.
And I think the thing that you said about money, I mean, you know that happened, but you didn't know the backstory. You still don't know the backstory about how all the pieces for her manifestation came together. We rarely do. I mean, I think it's pretty uncommon that even after your thing comes to you, after you've manifested something, that you know how it landed there with all of the intricate details that the field had to organize to get you the thing you want. But I think that's okay. I think it's actually good to know that we rarely know everything that went into it. And you know, I think that we like to think that the universe can snap its fingers and magic appears, but we do live in a physical reality that are governed by certain physical laws. I mean, sometimes our manifestations, our desires require some moving pieces. And when we get impatient, when you start asking yourself that question, why isn't it working? Where's my stuff? That can short-circuit that process. You know, I don't know. I mean, maybe it can, maybe it can't. It certainly probably slows it down when you start thinking it's not working and discounting what's actually going into making it happen.
Right. It's true. It definitely can short-circuit it. And I think, so do we just trust that it's all going to work out? Is that how we get past this it's not working thing? Like, do you have any tips for what's the best way to play with this? Make it easy?
I mean, trust, the words trust and faith, right? Those are ginormous words that come with lots of connotations. But I think the answer to that question is yes, you do trust. And making that easier may be looking at times in your life where you can see in reverse how it did work and what went into it, or thinking about stories like this, about how it did work and what would, like looking for evidence to support that these things actually are working out. But I want to say there's a better way to manage it than trust, but I'm not sure there is. What do you think?
It's not coming. I think it is. It's a trust, and it's not going to the place. I don't like to say what it's not, but it's trust, and it's also, you say this a lot, but it's like getting happy now. It's enjoying where you are now. Because when you look, you can find the stories. I mean, I have tons of stories in my life of this when I think about it, and where big things had to happen to create the experience I'm now living. And so it's that thinking like there's nothing wrong. There might not be anything else to do except for enjoy where you are while you're waiting.
Mm-hmm. And I think that enjoying piece is critical. I mean, and again, like I've said it to you, I say it all the time. If somebody had told me that my beloved was managing his stuff so that we could be together, I would have been, and I'm not kidding, a lot less dangerous out in the dating world than I was. Like, how much time did I spend in pain, in dysfunction? I mean, it's say that I really believed he was coming, but if I really believed he was coming, I would have relaxed and enjoyed the ride. I didn't.
Right.
And so I feel like, I mean, not to sound over-philosophical or like I'm beating myself up, I'm not, but I feel like I wasted a pretty significant amount of time where I could have just enjoyed the ride. And I think that's really key. Like, if you really believe that this thing that this desire that you've launched is happening, then there's no reason not to enjoy the ride. I mean, kids want Christmas every day. They know for sure Christmas is coming. They're not depressed because it's in December.
Right. Right. That's true. And I think that is it. Like, if you could just enjoy the ride, like, remember to enjoy the ride. And there they are again. You know, it's just...
I warned you.
It'll be that much better, and you'll be that much more... I don't know that you'll be more excited, but you just... I don't know, you just end up there differently, I guess.
I think it's a good measure. I don't think belief is required, so I'm not saying belief is a big deal. But belief is more comfortable, right? Like, it feels better to believe. Like, it is a good measure of your actual level of belief. Like, you've launched this desire. Are you super stoked? Are you going along with a happy skip and a smile on your face, or are you teeth gnashing and squeezing yourself? And, like, it is a good way to kind of measure where you're at in that process in terms of you've launched it and you're still struggling or worrying. It kind of lets you know where you're at there. But, you know, maybe that belief isn't as strong as you want it to be.
Right. I agree. Like, have fun. And one of the ways, I guess, I look at it is like, it's like collect the stories and the memories along the way. You know, versus, like, so that it's almost like you come with something fun when you get that, whatever it is.
Well, and I think that, you know, the Potsticker story, it was so easy for me to see. Like, when we finally got all the details and we saw what was happening on both ends, that was crystal clear. So what I was seeing was seeing me. And in that kind of realization, it's not hard for me to come up with a whole bunch of examples. I mean, I kind of had to think about it a little bit, but even going back and collecting those stories for yourself in retrospect, like in hindsight, I would say that would be a very powerful evidence journal to work on. Like, sit down and tell yourself the stories of how this worked for you in the past. I mean, that we've all got them.
We do. And we've all probably got them where it took a little bit of time. You know, like, what keeps coming to my mind is the group of friends I hang out with now. I set that intention at least a year before they showed up. And it took at least a year to solidify that, because people had to move from all over the country to come into that manifestation.
Yeah. It's good stuff.
It is good stuff. So our advice is just have fun along the way.
And relax into the process. I mean, particularly when you're feeling that higher level of struggle and desperation, just take a deep breath and remind yourself that what you're seeking is seeking you. And really be honest about what it's really going to take. I mean, people might have to move from all around the country. There might need to be, I'm not going to say that. I was about to say there might need to be terrible wildfires, but I think there were other things at play there. I mean, you know, somebody might be finishing up a divorce. Somebody might be, you know, stuck in a car with a radio station that won't change. I mean, we sometimes underestimate the physical reality we live in. But desires that are worthy enough to hold passionately are worthy enough to be patient for.
Ooh.
That was a tweetable.
That was a good one.
I feel like Marie Forleo.
Yeah, tweetable. Yeah.
Tweet this out, yo.
If you're listening to our show, tweet it. Otherwise, look for it on Lisa's Pinterest board later.
So, excellent. Have we nailed this one?
I think we've nailed this one. I think, yeah, we got it.
All right. We will be back same time next week. And thank you for listening, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.